Welcome back to the podcast, Unbinding the Bible. This is episode 168, And When You Fast. And on the podcast this week, we are going to look at Matthew 6, verses 16 to 18, which has Jesus speaking as he's already done with prayer and with giving. He now speaks about fasting in the same way. And so a lot of what you will hear is the same kind of contrast that Jesus is painting as he's already has in the first several verses of Matthew 6. But we'll dive in a little bit more specifically regarding what fasting is and what some expressions of that might look like today. And we'll get into talking about why this challenge is a particularly hard one and the temptation to want others to know what it is that we are giving up for the sake of Christ. And so I hope to have a little fun with you on the podcast, have some stories of my own crazy adventures with respect to fasting, and I hope that this podcast episode will be an encouragement to you. So without any more of an introduction, let's just get right into it. To begin this week's episode, allow me just to read Matthew 6, verses 16 through 18. And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Now, in the same way that Jesus has been talking about both giving and praying, he now turns to fasting, which is the third of the types of religious behaviors that were oftentimes expected to be performed by those who were truly faithful to God. Giving would be out of the blessings you've received, you are to give them or share those with someone in need. Prayer is to express your own desires before God of what you need from Him, what you are thankful to Him for, your daily dependence upon Him, your relationship with Him. You're seeking His provision and His help through life. And now fasting is something that you are choosing to remove from your life, not something that you're to share with somebody else like in giving, but something that you remove from your life in order to heighten your sense of dependence and need for the presence of God. And so fasting is not an overly complicated concept. The easiest way that you and I can think about fasting is simply by going without food. Even our word today in English, breakfast, is just the word break your fast. So most of us sleep during the night, and when you're asleep, you're not taking in any food. And so in the morning, when you eat something, which you typically call breakfast, it is us breaking our fast. We haven't eaten since the night before. Some of us have eaten late into the night with those late night snacks, which many of us love, myself included, but we are breaking our fast. That's ultimately what it means. And to perform this type of practice, Jesus is again describing the hypocrites, and not to be like them, who blast a trumpet to let everybody know how much money they give out, or to pray aloud in the streets so that people hear their wonderful language and are impressed with how spiritual sounding they are. This one, Jesus is saying, don't be like the hypocrites who look gloomy and disfigure their faces so that their fasting may be seen by others. Again, this fasting is going without something, so there is no other way for a person to know that you might be fasting except for you to look it in the face. And so, of course, Jesus says that's their reward. You know, the people that notice their disfigured, gloomy faces and say, wow, there's a really spiritual person. Hey, that's the kind of reward you were looking for. You got it, and that's all there is to gain from it. Jesus then says, but you, rather, when you fast, I want you to anoint your head and wash your face so that your fasting may not be seen by others. Now, this phrase, anoint your head and wash your face, this is just the normal way of caring for one's body, the normal physical appearance that everyone would have gone through in order to express, hey, life is good. We're in a good position here, everything is normal, everything is fine, even though internally your stomach might be growling, you might be depriving yourself of something that you really need. But Jesus is saying when you do it in this way, you're truly doing it before your Father who is in heaven, because nobody else has the opportunity to see what's really going on. And your Father who sees in secret, he will be the one to reward you. And of course, this circles back entirely to what kind of a reward is he going to grant? Well, that's really the purpose behind fasting. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But the intention of fasting, as far as I understand it, is that we deprive ourselves of physical sustenance so that we might focus on Jesus and the spiritual sustenance that he provides. So, for example, when our stomachs growl, when we are hungry, those then become opportunities to express to God our need for him and to ask him to fill us with his presence and power. You remember when Jesus met with the woman at the well in John 4, and the disciples went into the town to buy food, and they came back to Jesus who hadn't yet eaten, and they made a comment about Jesus, you haven't anything to eat, and he says to them, I have a food that you know nothing about. And they look at each other like, man, when did he get lunch? Like, how did this happen? And he's not talking about actual food. He's talking about there's this sense of satisfaction and filling. If you think about even the words that our Bibles use when describing the presence of the Spirit, the Spirit fills us. Like when I eat a big meal, I feel filled, right? I call it being full, but it's like, be full of the Spirit. So there is this interplay, I think in some ways, there is this real connection between the body and the spirit. And fasting, better than many other disciplines, gets at this connection. And I don't fully understand it. I do believe it's real, but there is a connection between the body and the spirit. And so fasting itself is actually quite humbling. If you have ever done it for any length of time, it will show you just how dependent we are on food. Or if you are cutting certain foods out of your diet, as many people will do during Lent, for example. They will say, for Lent, I will have no sweets. Or they'll say, for Lent, I won't have any alcohol. Or I'm not going to have a second helping of dinner during the month of Lent. Like, I'm not sure. A lot of people tend to go in the food type arena during Lent, which is fine. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I'm just, by way of example, it shows us when we try to fast just how dependent we are on certain foods and how easily we can be thrown off course when mere food is taken away from us. So fasting reminds us that we are very dependent and are actually controlled by far more than we think we are. Many times we think we are in control of our lives and of what happens to us and of the attitudes we bring to various things in life. But I would challenge you, try cutting your calories each day for several weeks, or try cutting sugar out of your diet altogether and see if your attitude or your emotions don't start playing games with you and don't start lashing out at unexpected times and moments. I've done several cleanses during my life. I've done several periods of time where I have attempted to cut out calories, reduce the number of calories that I eat, or to say I'm not going to eat anything sweet unless it just happens to be in a piece of fruit, which is a little more natural. And I will tell you, at about day 6, 7, or 8, I get unbelievably moody. I will be really short with my family members and snap at people. My wife and I did they call it the lemon cleanse. And the idea of it is to kind of really cleanse your system out of a lot of toxins that build up over time. And you're supposed to do it for 10 days. And I got to that day 7 or 8, and I got so grumpy and so, I guess, gloomy and disheveled, the way that Jesus describes it from the Pharisees' perspective. And my wife was like, you got to stop. Like, you can't do this any longer because you're going to drive us all insane. And she was right. Like, I had to swallow my pride and say I wasn't actually capable of making it 10 full days. And it's a real thing. And this body-spirit connection or body-soul connection, whatever you want it to be, is real. I do remember a period of time years ago, a good friend of mine and I, we were talking. We're still good friends to this day, and we're talking about challenges that we were facing in our lives. And we were talking about just guy things like struggles with lust and struggles with controlling our anger and struggles with, just things that we don't want to be part of our lives. And we were having a conversation about fasting and how fasting generally is the way we think about that physical part of us and how we're going to, try to have control over our bodies, the way Paul describes it in 1 Corinthians. And what we said was, I wonder if fasting and learning over time how to control one's physical desires and urges for food would have any type of a connection between gaining victory over one's struggles and desires for sexual fulfillment, which is ultimately, lust leading you into places you don't want to go. And amazingly, we found an incredibly close connection to the point where when we were depriving ourselves of food and choosing to say no to certain foods at certain times, we were finding victory in the lust category as well. And I do think that they are connected. I think when Jesus goes into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, and we're told was fasting 40 days and 40 nights. And then at the end of that time, it says he was hungry. When the enemy tempts him with a loaf of bread, turn this stone into bread. I have a fraction of an idea of what that was like, because I know what it feels like to be so hungry and just want this one thing. It doesn't matter what it is. I just want to eat it. And for Jesus to decline that offer and say, no, my Father will provide for me when he's good and ready, and I have the food that you know nothing about. He will provide for me the food that I need. It's found in following him and listening to his words. Like, that's a real thing. And it's not just fancy talk. And this can be evidenced by the fact that even among Christians today, this isn't something that's oftentimes talked about. There's very little to do, and I'm not just talking about it for health concerns, although I think there is value in doing this as a health concern. But in Jesus's context, he's speaking about this as something that was done for good reason, but was ultimately something that was made to be a spiritual action. And I think you can use fasting for a spiritual action. But what actually goes wrong occasionally, which I think is what Jesus is getting at here, is that fasting then can sometimes turn into a quote-unquote suffering for righteousness' sake. Like, we want other people to see these sacrifices that we are making, right? And sacrifices just meaning going without food, right? Or depriving ourselves of something that everybody else around us is enjoying that we're saying no to. So we want others to see these sacrifices we're making in the name of spiritual growth. And what better way to let them know how much we are giving up for God than to let them see our disheveled and disfigured and gloomy faces as we grimace through the pain of our stomach growling and us desiring, chocolate chip cookies at the end of the day or whatever it happens to be. And yet the temptation to do just that seems to always be there. Here I am giving up something. I look around me. Nobody else seems to be giving this up. Like, what's wrong with their spiritual life? Why aren't they taking this as seriously as me? And I remember moments of my life, I will say at this point in all sincerity, much less mature periods of my life, where I decided to impose a restriction on myself for my own spiritual growth and would look around me and wonder why no one else was doing this, why no one else seemed to be taking God as seriously as me. Oh yes, what a righteous, holy figure I was. And yet, what's interesting about this are the connections between the physical and the spiritual, the physical and the emotional. And this really gets me all wrapped up on the inside. I remember working in a factory and not really loving my job that much. and looking forward to lunch break when I knew that we were going to be able to sit down and have a meal. Like it was the highlight point of my entire workday. And maybe that's not abnormal. Maybe some people don't love their jobs in the factory, and so at least they get to enjoy food during that really long day. But I remember working 11-hour shifts and having my lunch break, after 6 straight hours of work, which my lunch break at the time was at 9 p.m., and going into the break room when I was on this lemon cleanse with my wife and having to drink lemon water with maple syrup and cayenne pepper to cleanse the inside of my system, and realizing like, here's this moment when I really looked forward to eating food and stopping work. And what I have to look forward to is drinking some disgusting lemon thing while the guys around me are eating Bojangles. Or what was worse was a night when the company I worked for decided to have employee appreciation night, and they went out and bought Bojangles for the entire work crew. And I was on this lemon cleanse and wanted to sit there and not eat the food. And it sounds silly, and I hope you're laughing because I mean for this to be silly, but it was a real struggle. Like you're smelling the food, it smells incredible, and you're deciding for me at the time, it was a health reason, but I'm trying not to draw attention to myself because I know Jesus, speaks negatively about that, at least in this context. And so I'm sitting there smelling the food, choosing not to eat it, swallowing a lemon drink, which of course, when you're smelling Bojangles, the lemon drink tastes even worse than it normally does because, at least at my house, I could try to put aside all the good smelling food and save that for the time when I'm off the cleanse. But here's Jesus talking about these actions that we do for whatever reason, and not drawing attention to ourselves because these actions aren't about us. They're giving us opportunities to draw closer to God. And I think the way this has played itself out in my life has been some of the times for health reasons. But what it has shown me is that I was and have been, and to a large extent still am, but the stronghold is a lot less on me, very, very dependent on certain kinds of food. Getting grumpy and angry when I can't have a piece of cake is something that in a spiritual sense, I want to wrestle with. Like I want to ask, why am I needing that thing in order to feel satisfied? Where am I drawing my satisfaction from? What are the things in my life that are hitting the serotonin levels in my brain that make me feel happy? And are those things sustainable long term? Are those things the best for me spiritually or emotionally or socially or physically? As I get into my mid-40s, I'm really considering what it is that I'm eating and what it is that I'm not for its natural health benefits. But then I get into it a little bit deeper and realize that it has emotional benefits and spiritual benefits and social benefits and so on. And so what I think Jesus is really getting at here is he is talking to us about not drawing attention to ourselves via the things that we are doing. And now I start to see this all over the place. So my wife and I and several of our kids actually enjoy lifting weights. So we go to a local gym. Lots of us like to go on walks, so we do that too. Some of us run, but a lot of us have, we all have a membership, a family membership to the gym, but we'll go to the gym and do different workouts, and we all have our own preferences and which days of the week we go based on who works when and who goes to school and on and on. But I have noticed that when I go to the gym and I work out pretty hard, I work for an hour to an hour and 15 minutes lifting weights, trying my best to get in shape. I'd like to lose some weight personally. I'd like to be a little more fit. And at the end of leg day, which for me is about twice a week, my legs hurt. Like they're just, my glutes hurt, my hamstrings hurt, my quads hurt. I get out of bed in the morning and I hobble to the bathroom because until my legs feel loose, they're just really, really sore. And from what I hear from my wife, which I don't remember, but I do believe her when she says it, that she says how much I talk about how sore my legs are at the end of gym day. And she says it'd be fine if you just said it once or twice after you got home or when the soreness sets in. But she's like, you talk about it all the time. And it's funny because I think what I'm doing is I'm somewhat wanting to draw attention to how hard I'm working in the gym and seeking some type of affirmation from somebody else that I have in fact been working hard in the gym. And what better way to let them know that than to, oh, my legs, oh, they're so sore, oh my goodness. And what's really scary is that she tells me that I say it over and over and over. And I don't remember doing that. Like, I don't actually remember saying it over and over and over, which means it's so subconscious for me that this temptation to want to bring before other people these great sacrifices that I'm making in the name of health, right, are so ingrained in what I'm doing, I don't even know they're happening. Now, I'll tell you, this is probably one of the greatest reasons why Jesus exhorts us to live out life in the kingdom in community, because we are deceiving ourselves if we think that we alone will be able to see in ourselves the things that need corrected or the things that need adjusted or the things that we need encouraged about. If we think it's up to us, and that we're surely going to see the flaws in our own lives. Like, we're kidding ourselves. That's a joke. We don't see the things in our lives that are not as they should be. Those who are in community with us, though, can see them as plain as day. And if we're willing and open to listen to them tell us that, we then can begin to monitor that self-talk, right? Monitor that subconscious expressions that we have. And I want to be aware of that because, sure, that would be annoying to be in a house or a community with somebody who just always talks about how sore they are. Or I'm restricting some of the things that I'm eating. And when I talk about what I can't eat or how hungry I am or how much I am, suffering or whatever by not being allowed to eat certain foods, like, that's another area of my life that I'm constantly aware of, is that, number one, most people really don't care to hear about that. And I am probably guilty of being a classic oversharer as a person. I feel like there's a way to connect with people by just telling them everything about me, which sometimes is fine and lots of times is not fine. So yeah, classic oversharer. Maybe I should get a t-shirt for that. But the point being, it's very easy for me to share this kind of stuff with others. And number one, most people don't care. But number two, I need to make sure that what this is not some attempt at garnishing pity or getting people to, oh man, you just deal with so much. I just can't believe you can do that. And I have some food restrictions. And as I've tried to come to terms with those things, I have found, sadly, that I talk about it a lot. And sometimes I'm doing that because I need the reassurance that it's okay and that other people deal with food sensitivities too. But at other times I realize, is this one of those subconscious things working again, that I'm trying to steer the conversation back to the direction of me? And, well, there was this time when poor me, could smell Bojangles but wasn't allowed to eat it, and I had to drink a lemon shake. You know what? Big deal. Like, that's 10 years ago, and I can do that now, and I'm fine. My kids get stuff like that all the time from the restaurants, and I don't eat that because I choose not to. And God works through it. But what he has shown me, and the reason why I'm giving you so many examples of this kind of thing, is because I feel it's all the same. There is this mind-body connection, spirit-body connection. And when we enter into this with our actual bodies, like, this is a body thing. Jesus has spoken about our money and giving money to the poor. Like, money is a material thing. This isn't for us to think about our spiritual riches and how we should share those with other people. Jesus is literally talking about our money. And here Jesus is literally talking about our food. Like, some people are very particular about their food. Growing up, my mom didn't really discipline us too much in this area. And so my siblings and I got a little bit wild, and we would not be considerate of one another and who got food. If you were last to the dinner table, you might not get any food. And so my youngest sister developed some food, I don't even know what you would call it, just protective measures, right? So she would go first in the line, and she would get a big plate of food to make sure that if she missed out on firsts or seconds, that at least she got something to eat. And it became a joke later in life, but when we were kids, we'd all go to this local candy store in our town, and she would get a box of candy, but found out that if she just put it in the fridge to keep it cool, there's a bunch of chocolate covered things or whatnot, that some of us might just eat it. And so she had to learn that if she doesn't, mark her food with her name, then it might not be there the next day when she goes back, which is such a terrible thing to say, but it actually happened. And so she would write on her food, Stephanie's food, eat and die, is what she would write on there. And we kind of laugh about it now, but it actually worked. Like, we realized, oh shoot, she's read it, and she actually would keep a tally mark on a separate sheet of paper about how many pieces of candy were still in her box, so that if anybody did open the box and take a piece, she'd know it. And man, that kind of made us all straighten up and take notice. She was pretty clever then, and she's still pretty clever now. So, but the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is because these are spiritual actions, right? Like, taking a piece of candy that I'm desiring that isn't mine is a spiritual thing, but it's played out in a physical way. Like, I physically take the lid off that box that belongs to my sister and I eat a piece of her candy. Or me going to the dinner table and only feeling the need I have to fill my stomach doesn't let me engage the spiritual part of me, which says, I have several siblings who also want to eat. Do they want to have seconds? And I've had seconds the last 400 meals we've had as a family. What if I went without seconds once so that my sister could have seconds? Like, that's a spiritual thought that is worked out as it relates to something physical, i.e. food, that to me anyway meant an enormous amount. Like, I remember going to sleep at night. Man, I didn't know this was going to turn into confession hour, but what the heck. I remember going to sleep at night after my mom went to the grocery and bought our favorite cereals, just thinking about how I got to wake up the first thing in the morning and just eat like 3 huge bowls of honeycomb cereal. I was a foodie. Like, I found so much comfort, so much satisfaction, so much just thrill in being able to sit down and eat food and eat as much as I wanted. And now, as I get older, not just from health perspectives, but from a spiritual and an emotional perspective, I realize that I have been using food as an emotional comfort, as a spiritual way to get my mind off of something that was troubling me. And when fasting is a part of your life, in whatever form that may take, you may have 1 meal a week that you choose to skip. You may have 100 calories a day that you would normally eat, you choose not to, and that little feeling of hunger before bedtime is just enough to remind you we are dependent creatures. We need things every day that God Himself has to provide for us, and that we're not going to be controlled by our fleshly desires for food or sex or anything else, but we're going to be controlled by the Spirit of God who leads us, guides us, and provides for everything we need. And so it's a learning process. It's a growing process. And what Jesus is teaching us here is that this isn't a process to be broadcast to the masses. This isn't a process to engage in for the purpose of building up your spiritual life and your relationship with God and your closeness with Him and your dependence with Him by broadcasting it to everyone in the world that this is what you're doing. Now, maybe I'm breaking the letter of His law right now by telling all of you this, but I think the spirit of Jesus's law is that what people are trying to do is they're trying to showcase their greatness. You know, we're not great. I'm happy to share with you all my flaws, all my screw ups, all my mistakes, because I feel like when we do that, we demonstrate that we are weak, but He is strong, and He's sustaining us through all of our mess ups. Like when I was in high school and I was a part of a youth group, and we would get several youth groups together, and World Vision held what they called the 30-hour famine. And it was to raise awareness of hunger and how many children under the age of 5 died every day due to malnutrition or starvation or, dirty, infected water or etc. And we were to raise money. Well, somebody will sponsor me a quarter for every hour I go without food. And we would form a big lock-in in a church somewhere, typically the biggest one around. And all my friends would get together. It was a lot of fun. We had a blast. It was more just like a big lock-in with 50 teenagers and several adults. And then we had little sessions that we did. And we would have little, you could drink water. I think you maybe could chew gum. I think they let you drink some juice, which they probably shouldn't have. But anyway, we were teenagers and we weren't really doing it to be spiritual. It was supposed to be something to give you just a sense of the fact that some kids live their whole life. And if they just only went 30 hours without food, like that would be nothing. Sometimes they go days. But when you're a teenager and you just eat honeycomb by the box every day, like I did, then you step into a church and you're not allowed to eat. Like, what the heck do you do at a lock-in if you don't have food? That's what we did all the time. We would have other church events. It's just like, oh, there's tacos. Oh, there's pizza. Oh, there's popcorn. Oh, who's going to make the pretzels? It was just and now you take food out and you're like, well, what do you even do? Well, we were teenagers. So what did we do? We laid on the floor, got a piece of paper and a pen, 10, 12 hours into the lock-in, and our stomachs were growling. So we thought, well, here's a great way to pass time. Why don't we just write down and make big lists of all the foods we wish we were eating right now? Oh, brownies. Oh, if I could just have a piece of pizza. Oh, if I could just have a Coke. Oh, I would do anything for a chocolate chip cookie. And that's how we spent several of the hours of this 30-hour famine that was supposed to be teaching us to remember what people do in this world who don't have anything. And here we are drooling over our pieces of paper with pens, imagining the kind of foods we can't wait to eat as soon as we're not on the 30-hour famine anymore. Like somehow it never fully computed. I do think we raised several $100s each year, which I hope was put toward a good cause. I don't even remember what happened with it. But these are some of the ways that we don't realize how addicted to food we are. And I'm not talking like addiction, like we need to go to rehab or anything like that, but our minds and hearts are sometimes so connected to our stomachs, we don't even know it. And the only way to see how deeply that connection goes is to deprive ourselves of those things. And there were times in my life where I would have said I could never do that. I could never deprive myself of certain foods. I could never be in a room where people were eating chocolate cake and say, no thanks, I'm good, and just still sit and socialize with them. Like realizing the control that certain things had over me manages to be both a physical and an emotional and a spiritual reality. Because when my mind is so fixated on food, I'm unable to focus on a lot of other things. And I've noticed that the way my brain works and the way my emotions work are oftentimes triggered when I have a full stomach, and they are distracted when my stomach is empty. And I realize right now in that moment, my emotions and my spiritual side are being controlled by my stomach. Like my stomach is literally calling the shots. It should not be like that. And so fasting is a discipline that the Pharisees anyway, and some maybe even today, will implement into their lives on a weekly basis, some kind of a regular basis, in order to begin to experiment and begin to learn how to have control over one's physical urges. Because we are supposed to be in control of that. Those things are not supposed to control us. And I will tell you, as a forewarning, I highly encourage you to do some kind of fasting in your own life. But if you have never done it before, it will be a shock to your system when you start. And so I would not encourage you to do a 40-day fast right out of the gate. I don't think you should ever do that personally, but maybe some people can. I wouldn't even encourage you to try to truly fast for a day. I would encourage you to start very small, maybe with removing one meal on one day during 1 week, and just see what it's like. And every time your stomach growls, say, God, I am thankful that you made me as a creature who needs to eat. But I realize that I have a lot of other needs in my life besides just food. And one of them in particular is you. And I do not crave you and desire you and hunger for you the same way that I do for food. And I want you to begin to awaken a change in that way. in me. Thank you so much for providing me with food. Thank you for making so much of it taste so good. And would you slowly, over time, begin to discipline me and train me and mature me such that I can taste the distinguishing flavors and experiences of intimacy with you that don't require me to be dependent upon things that I can reach for and put into my stomach, but rather things that you provide for me that I can put into my soul. And I would ask you to help me. I would ask you to strengthen me and to grow me and to mature me and to put me and your spirit together in controlling our body, not the body controlling us. And we thank you for that and ask for your guidance and your help as we go. That's what I would do. And I would pray something like that in your own words, with your own understanding in relating to him, and just see how it goes. But the shock that I alluded to is what I've experienced. And so maybe I should back up and say, if you are at all like me, you might be in for a shock, because I have experienced many shocks and still will the longer I live and try new things and give up other things and go without certain things and try to implement practices in certain ways and places in my life. But the shock is that our brains sometimes can get addicted to the sugars. And some of you have experienced it when you are a coffee drinker and you go without coffee for several days and you get headaches from caffeine withdrawal. Like, a headache is not, it is a measurable thing, I guess. It's pain that's experienced in the body, but it's also this, like, we just want it, right? You just get up in the morning, you're like, oh, I just need coffee. Well, that's fine, and you can do that. But recognize that what that is now, in a moment, your attitude, your emotions, your approach to life is now dependent upon some physical substance that you need to put into your body. So I have several, don't talk to me until I've had at least my second cup of coffee, right? And it's kind of a joke. But when you stop and think about that, what that means is, like, I have to have this substance, or I will be treating you and everyone around you in a way that you don't like and really don't want to be a part of. So don't deprive me of this thing that I need. Like, caffeine's a tricky one because it actually can become addictive, very much so. But anyway, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not here to tell you about what you should and shouldn't put into your body. I just am trying to point out that there is a major connection between the physical and the spiritual. Jesus is tapped into it. He says this is ultimately for closeness with your Father. That's why this practice exists. It's not here for you to showcase how great you are and all the wonderful things you're willing to set aside in life in order to be a better person, right? It isn't about that. It's about you saying, there are things in life I want to put in place. There are things in life I want to remove because they are not helping me get where I want to get in my relationship with God. And between me and him, I'm going to pursue these things. Whether anybody else ever finds out about it or not, irrelevant. I'm pursuing them because I think this is what is best for my walk with him. And these are the decisions he's led me to as far as what that will look like for me. And so that's all the time I have this week for the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you. Got a rating this week on the podcast for Apple Podcasts, which is always encouraging to see. And it appears as if some of you have been sharing some of these episodes this past week. The listens were a little bit higher than I think they've been in weeks past. So thank you for that. I know last week was an encouraging episode for me to walk through, and I hope it was for you too. So if this has been an encouragement to you, please feel free to pass this on to someone, or give it a listen again, or share it with somebody in your church or with your family or any friend that you think might be encouraged by it. And if you haven't yet left a rating or review, please do that on whatever podcast app you choose to listen to these episodes. So appreciative of each of you and the great time we have together as a listening community, and continue to challenge me with any thoughts that you have. You can reach me at unbindingthebible@gmail.com. So I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will talk to you next time.